Hi and welcome back to my channel. In this video I'll discuss the importance of encomiendas and how they played a pivotal role in indigenous genocide, exploitation, and slavery. In the United States, slavery is often synonymous with Africans and slave plantations. But there existed another form of slavery, and that was the encomienda system. But before I go into that, it's important to discuss the history so viewers and others can understand where this actually started. The encomienda system is essentially a labor system which has its origins in medieval Spain. During the Reconquista period, which was a chapter in Spain's history where Spaniards were trying to take land back from Muslim rule, the Spanish crown rewarded the Spaniards who managed to successfully take land back, plots of land along with the people that were living there. However, this system was far less brutal than the eventual encomienda systems that would be in place in the Americas. Despite Islamic and Christian kingdoms being completely different from one another, there were similar frameworks of rule and law. This essentially made the encomienda system a better representation of feudalism than what would take place later on in the Americas. Amazingly, at the end of the Reconquista period in 1492 would be the same year as when Spain would set out west to venture out into the Americas and other islands. When the Spaniards arrived in the Americas, particularly the Caribbean islands in 1492, the encomienda system that they implemented took a much more vile and volatile change than what had happened in the medieval Spain periods during the Reconquista. The Spanish soldiers and settlers that arrived on these islands immediately started making land acquisitions, and those indigenous people that lived on the land were forcibly put to work. If the indigenous people that did not die from disease or warfare somehow miraculously survived, they were put on these encomiendas. Unfortunately for the Taínos, Caribs, and other indigenous people that lived on these islands, there was little escape. The Spanish crown essentially granted these lands with people already living there to Spanish settlers, where indigenous people of the Caribbean islands were treated no more than expendable livestock. They were not seen as human. The lives of these people took a turn for the worse. Forced labor, extreme exploitation, high mortality rates, cultural suppression, physical abuse, land dispossession, and social disruption. Bartolomé de las Casas, a missionary and friar who was also sent to the Caribbean islands and partook in the encomienda system, but also to spread Christianity to the indigenous people, recorded these atrocities firsthand. From one quote from his book, Historia de las Indias, History of the Indians, he is quoted saying, "The reason the Christians have murdered on such a vast scale and killed anyone and everyone in their way is purely and simply greed. Their insatiable greed and overweening ambition know no bounds. The land is fertile and rich, the inhabitants simple, forbearing, and submissive. The Spaniards have shown not the slightest consideration for these people, treating them, and I speak from first-hand experience, having been there from the outset, not as brute animals indeed. I would to God that they had done and had shown them the consideration they afford their animals, so much as piles of dung in the middle of the road. They have had as little concern for their souls as for their bodies, all the millions that perished, having gone to their deaths with no knowledge of God and without the benefit of the sacraments. One fact in all, this is widely known and beyond dispute, for even the tyrannical murderers themselves acknowledged the truth of it. The indigenous people never did the Europeans any harm whatever. On the contrary, they believed them to have descended from the heavens, at least until they, or their fellow citizens, had tasted at the hands of these oppressors a diet of robbery, murder, violence, and all other manner of trials and tribulations." The encomienda systems accelerated well into the rest of the Americas, starting with the fall of Tenochtitlan in central Mexico, moving down into the Mayan societies, as well as all the way down into Peru. While the new laws of 1542, enacted by the Crown in Spain, pushed for better reform and treatment of indigenous people in these encomiendas, they were mostly futile and useless, because you can't expect people in bad faith to respect laws that are made from a country 3,000 miles away from home. Not to mention this was in the 1500s, where people operated much different on behavior and respect. the mistreatment and genocide of indigenous people through encomiendas continued. I do hope this video has brought some careful insight into what the encomienda systems have brought to the Americas since 1492. So when you look up encomienda systems in other videos and documents, it's often euphemistic descriptions and legalistic jargon, often saying that encomiendas was no more than serfdom. I believe this is incorrect. Encomienda systems in the Americas were in fact slave plantations. I'll leave this one last point in my defense, and that encomienda systems were in fact slave plantations. Put yourself in the shoes of an indigenous person in the Americas. If your land is taken by a foreign invader, you no longer have rights, you can't escape the land, and if you do, you'll get punished severely, and you also don't get paid. Sounds like slavery to me. Once again, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like the content, please feel free to subscribe, share with friends, and I look forward to making more content in the future. With that being said, sayonara.